So as we segue into the next item on our program, one of my favorite 30 minutes of today is coming up next, and that is the equivalent of our industry's State of the State. And Monte has done, as I mentioned earlier, a terrific job for 20 years leading this association, growing this association, and no matter whether it was a federal issue, a state issue, or a local issue, our industry has been very fortunate to benefit from Monte's intellect and precise knowledge of all the things that have to go right for our industry to succeed. And so please join me in welcoming back to the stage our Executive Director, Monte Shaw.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Nick. Those were very kind words. I just looked out and saw my wife's in the audience, so I'm glad she heard someone say something nice about me. Sometimes it's the other things. Thanks for that. Thanks for that introduction. And I want to thank Nick, for the service. We don't have an association if we don't have active board members. And I just want to I know I've seen several of you out there. IRFA staff know that we do not, that no member owes us their membership. And we know that we have to work each and every day to earn that trust and earn that support. And together, we have built the world's most diverse trade association for renewable fuels. Every aspect of production from every conceivable feedstock is represented when the IRFA board sits around its table. And I hope that makes all IRFA board members proud to be a part of the organization. And on just behalf of the staff and everyone here present, let me just say to the IRFA board, thank you. Let's give them a round of applause. So everywhere you look, you can see anniversaries, big and small. And, there's milestones. So in December, as they mentioned, and thanks for that joke, I was backstage, but I heard the joke. The IRFA board did surprise me with an award. It wasn't quite as big and shiny as the one the governor just got, but it was very nice and it was very touching. And they also surprised me with a gift for the occasion, a Bartesian. If you look up here, you can see a picture of the award and this Bartesian thing. Now, if you don't know what that is a machine that at the touch of one button makes you a cocktail. Quite frankly, I'm not sure they thought that one through before they chose it. But I don't know whether it was the award or it was the Bartesian, but it kind of put me in a reflective mood. Because 20 years is a long time. It's often considered a generation. 20 years is considered a generation. So a generation ago, after helping enact the federal renewable fuel standard, when I worked at the national RFA in DC back in 2005, I moved to Iowa to begin working here with the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association. And over the RFS's first generation, it's been incredibly successful, driving ethanol and biodiesel use to new heights. Now, it was never without a struggle, new Congresses, new administrations, new lawsuits all the time, but we were always moving forward. Now, I wonder how many of you here actually remember how we got there? Do you remember? Yes? Some of you will say MTBE. Yes, there was a phase out of MTBE due to water pollution concerns, and that was part of it, but that was actually not enough. After all, the legislation that created the RFS 20 years ago was not named the MTBE Elimination Act of 2005. It was in fact named the Energy Policy Act of 2005. I know that because I Googled it. I wanted to make sure my memory was clear. And when I Googled it, the new AI overlords that control us told me that the RFS was only the fourth most important bullet point in the summary of that bill. So what drove Congress to pass comprehensive energy policy that included the RFS? Well, that's another anniversary, although somber, that we will be commemorating this year. Because some of you will remember that 25 years ago this September, terrorists hijacked planes. And they flew those planes into the World Trade Center in New York City, into the Pentagon in DC, and thanks to the courageous intervention of the passengers, into a field in Pennsylvania. But that plane was headed to the Capitol building, our nation's capital. Now later this morning, I'm going to have a fireside chat up here with Ari Fleischer. He was traveling with President Bush on 9/11, and he continues to keep an eye on DC to this day. And I really hope you join us. I think it's going to be a fascinating look back to then and what's going on now, and we're going to have a chance to submit questions to him, so I hope you join us later today. Now, our theme is renewable fuels at work, and we have seen the power of renewable fuels at work. When renewable fuels do well, farmers do well. When farmers do well, the rural economy does well. When the rural economy does well, the entire state of Iowa does well. Quite frankly, that's true throughout the Midwest and all the rural economies. Unfortunately, renewable fuels here in Iowa have been stuck in neutral the last few years. As you can see from this chart here, for the third year in a row, production of ethanol in Iowa was at 4.6 billion gallons. Now, hey, that's still number one, and by a long ways to my friends from other states out there, but it's not keeping up with the productivity of our farmers. And in fact, for the first time in a generation, we had a modern dry mill ethanol plant shut down last year permanently. And it was even more challenging for biodiesel. They kind of had a 1-2 gut punch of federal policy uncertainty that left some of our biodiesel plants idling for most of the year, much of the year. And in 2025, Iowa biodiesel production plummeted 31% to a 10-year low. We have to go back 10 years to find that. You know, we used to be able to say Iowa had 12 biodiesel plants. We have 8 operating today. So when you think of the state of the industry, and I look out there, what do I see? I see farmers and I see renewable fuels producers that are ready, willing, and able, but they have been shunted off to the sidelines. This cannot abide. We witnessed the power of renewable fuels at work during the first 2 decades of this century, and it can happen again. But we need both state and federal policy to once again embrace the positive power of renewable fuels at work. We need to remove the barriers and the uncertainty. We need to resist those that would tie our hands behind our backs with mistaken memories of times gone by. Instead, we must be allowed to embrace new tools and new technologies to open up new markets. And those markets are at our fingertips. They're right there. We can get renewable fuels off the sidelines and back in the game, and our message is put us to work. There is a golden age of agriculture just over the horizon if we will promote renewable fuels at work. Now, many of you have probably heard me tell the story of how I came of age during the 1980s farm crisis. It was not a fun time. But I remind people that we really actually never got out of the oversupply problem until the turn of this century. Now, what did we do? We created farm programs trying to stabilize the market, but sometimes those came at a great cost to rural economies. And then in the 90s, well, farmers often farmed at a financial loss and then were made whole by going to a trip to the mailbox to get a government check. That was not what they wished for, but it was the reality they faced. It was the growth of renewable fuels at the turn of the century that created the market demand that not only absorbed that excess productivity from the 80s and 90s, but it grew along with the ever-increasing productivity of farmers for 2 decades this century. And it was a great time to be a farmer. So, you know, the good news is over the last 20 years, we made E10 the normal fuel, the standard fuel in the country. The bad news is sometime around 2018, we actually saturated the E10 market. But our farmers never stopped being more productive, and that's why we're here today. Today, the supply of corn is growing at probably about 3 to 4 times faster than the domestic demand is growing for corn. So, to put a point on that, I guess I would say, consider that, you know, Mother Nature in 2025 threw a few curveballs, a few monkey wrenches at our farmers, and how did they respond? Just by producing a 17 billion bushel corn crop, 1 billion bushels more than the largest corn crop ever before. And with corn ending stocks now back around 2 billion bushels, it's not hard to see why prices are back under the cost of production for many farmers. So the question we have today is, what are we going to do about it? When you have a supply running above demand, in my mind, there are 3 options. First, you can reduce supply like we did in the 1980s. We idled a significant portion of our productive land to address the problem. And while it might have stabilized the price of corn, for those that were still farming, it forced thousands of farmers off their land and left entire counties bereft of economic opportunities. And unfortunately, if you look at the USDA long-term outlook, what do? They hold the price projection for corn right above $4 for the next 10 years. I might note that is still below their estimated cost of production during that decade. But how do they do it? If you flip the page and dig into it, they do it by reducing acres by 10%. So I stand here today And I say that is not a good solution. We do not want to force thousands more farmers off their land. Now, the bottom line is that reducing supply may raise the price of corn, but only for the farmers who survive to enjoy it. And the overall economic impact of less corn production is hugely detrimental to the Midwest states and to their economies. So, the second way that you can try to address this supply-demand imbalance is to do what we did in the 90s, and that is with massive farm bills. Now, let's put aside for a second that no farmer actually wants that. But consider that today, the challenge of balancing that market might cost a farm bill $20, $30, $40, maybe even $50 billion a year. I don't think the U.S. can afford that, even if there was the political will to do it. So no, we need to go back to that third option. It has worked before, and it can work again. Now, I suppose it's fair to ask, is there actually a demand solution to the problem we face? And to that end, the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association, along with the Iowa Corn Growers, we commissioned a study by prominent economists to answer that very question. Now, the good news is the economic study found there are actually plenty of demand options for renewable fuels that will grind up corn and crush soybeans if only we have the will to go get them. These markets are not going to be handed to us. They are going to require new tools and new technologies that, even as we speak, are often under attack right here in the Midwest. The study found that replacing E10 with E15 as the new normal for U.S. gas tanks would create enough new demand to balance that corn supply at a profitable price point for several years. So that is our most urgent effort. Having said that, the study found that E15 is not enough does not create enough demand for the next generation, for the next 20 years to keep up with farmers. So while E15 is immensely positive for the next 5 to 10 years, however long it takes to phase that in, it just as importantly buys us time. It buys us time to develop the larger markets that we need to drive agriculture for the next generation and beyond. But I don't want anyone to leave here today thinking that if we just get E15, all of our problems are solved for the next generation. It is the vital first step. Now, the good news is, with that time from E15, there are massive new markets out there that are looking for the very solutions that renewable fuels have to offer. The marine industry represents an 80 billion gallon a year opportunity. And the worldwide airline industry by 2050 is expected to need 150 billion gallons a year of fuel. And they are asking for our help. They're asking us. Now, the trick is, to be attractive to those markets, we must lower the carbon intensity of our fuels. If the marine industry is going to pay more to replace their dirty bunker fuel, which is also dirt cheap, with low carbon alternatives, then every single point of CI reduction makes ethanol and biodiesel more attractive. Again, if the airlines are going to pay more for sustainable aviation fuel, then more carbon reduction bang for the fuel buck is what's going to be successful. Now, I cannot overemphasize how massive these new markets are. If renewable fuels can provide just a portion of those low carbon needs, it could drive demand for farmers for the next 20 to 30 years, even when accounting for that never-ending productivity increase of American farmers. Now, I also think we need to be honest with ourselves. We are not the only people looking with wide eyes at those new large markets. Brazil, China, India, and many others are rushing to put themselves in the preferred position for those markets. And at the same time, our competitors are moving forward. We find ourselves fighting a defensive action simply to protect the ability to use the tools and technologies necessary to produce ultra-low carbon renewable fuels. Tools like carbon capture, use, and sequestration, CCUS, and regenerative agriculture. So let me take a moment here. I want to pause just a second, because this is something sometimes people don't fully understand. And I want to talk about that phrase, ultra-low carbon. Now, I would assume, there's some pretty bright lights in my eyes, but I would assume out there that there are probably some of you in this audience who think that carbon emissions are an existential threat to the future of the human race. If I was a betting man, I would assume that there's probably even a few more people out there who actually don't really care about carbon emissions, and maybe some who even think it's some kind of government hoax just to control more of our lives. I want to say to you all today, I don't care. I don't care. Now, I'm not trying to be rude. What I really mean by that is that our personal political viewpoints on carbon are irrelevant to these massive new markets. We have customers willing to pay us for ultra-low carbon renewable fuels. It is simply good business, not politics, that drives our desire to produce those fuels. So as we work on policies that are going to move our industry forward, to drive demand for corn and soybeans, and to return the rural economy to a path of prosperity, please leave your politics on carbon at home. So much is at stake. We only seek to provide the products that our customers want to buy. If petty politics ties the hands of American producers, our competitors will be more than glad to step up and take those markets. And today I do think Midwest agriculture is in a crisis. I still think it's a small c crisis. However, I do fear that if we continue to ignore the fundamental supply and demand metrics out there, and we don't move rapidly to pursue these new markets that I just talked about, and we don't pursue the tools and technologies necessary to get them, I fear that in a few more years, we're going to see the crisis of today turn into a capital F, capital C farm crisis. And I don't want to go back there. So for that reason, I hope you'll stay after lunch. We have 2 panels this afternoon. Experts are going to be diving into both the new market opportunities that are out there, as well as the tools and technologies that we need to get there. And we're also going to have economic experts to answer your questions about the impacts of both the actions and inactions in that regard. Now, hopefully I've convinced you that there is a demand solution to our current farm challenges. If so, how do we do it? Well, we must turn the inaction of the last year or so into policy victories. And we're going to dig into that right after my remarks with our policy panel. And I think you're really going to enjoy the insight that they can give you. So looking back on 25, or actually let's rewind all the way to December of 24, we see several areas of policy excitement that ultimately stagnated into frustration. There was a year-end funding bill in December of 2024 that included provisions to remove the outdated and unjustified restrictions on year-round E15 sales. But one tweet from Elon Musk put that proposal on the ash heap of history. Just 2 weeks ago, another E15 compromise, another ray of hope for farmers, disappeared into disappointment of congressional action. And I fear if we don't see Congress act on E15 in the month of February, right now, I don't think we're going to see congressional action for years to come. 2025 was also when we were supposed to have the new 45Z Clean Fuels Production Tax Credit kick in. Instead, we were left without regulatory guidance for over a year, which was frustrating to ethanol producers and kneecapped our biodiesel producers. Last year, we also saw the excitement over a very robust RFS blending rule for 26 and 27 morph into anxiety because we're still waiting. We're still hoping that it might be done a quarter of the way through this year. So quite frankly, I'm glad that 2025 is behind us. And because I'm a glass half full guy, I think that many of the seeds we planted in 2025, as frustrating as that year was, might actually bear fruit in 26. As it was mentioned earlier, 45Z tax guidance was just announced on Tuesday. We're going to dig into that in the policy panel. And we do expect those RFS blending levels to be finalized in March. And we hope that the robust levels proposed are what is finalized. Those targets will be maintained in the final rule. And that year-round E15 proposal that keeps slipping away, it could be passed in February if President Trump throws his weight behind a solution. And here closer to home, we just honored the governor. On January 1, 2026, it marked the compliance deadline for her groundbreaking E15 access standard. It was her vision and her leadership that passed that bill. It would not have happened without her, and there were many supporters and leaders in the legislature, but she was the one that pushed that through. And that was about 3.5 years ago. Now, when the governor signed that bill 3.5 years ago, there were only a little over 200 stations in Iowa reporting sales of E15. You can see on the chart up there. Today, there are over 1,100 stations offering the option of E15 to their consumers. Nearly every Iowan has the choice to buy E15. Sometimes it's branded as unleaded 88. They have the choice to push that button on the pump. And what happens for consumers if they push that button? Well, they get more octane for their engine, and they usually save somewhere around 15 cents a gallon for their wallet. And I know she's left, but I think we owe one more round of applause to Governor Reynolds for that accomplishment. We really cannot minimize this success. Nebraska has already passed a similar measure. Minnesota is working on one right now. Even California recently passed a law to authorize year-round E15 at the state level. And IRFA now is sending them our story here, of our successes here, to help guide their implementation out there. I don't know. I hope they listen. I don't know. It's California. But the impact has been clear. While we won't get official state numbers on 2025 E15 sales until April, the preliminary data suggests that our E15 sales last year were going to be close to 500 million gallons here in the state of Iowa alone. And that is the year before. That is the year before the E15 standard actually went into effect. And that's not even going to be the biggest impact. The biggest impact of the E15 access standard here will not be the gallons sold in Iowa. Rather, the real impact will be to show retailers from coast to coast that if you offer it, they will come. Given the choice, E15 will be the standard fuel in the United States. The question is not if, but when. Now, just last week, President Trump came to Iowa. Some of you might have noticed that. Excuse me. I needed an applause line in here somewhere so I can get a drink of water. You guys are a tough crowd. Who just kept their job? I joke to staff, if they don't applaud, I fire them, but it's not true. So just last week, President Trump came to Iowa. I would note that I have no idea how much time I have left, so I'm just going to keep talking. So we came to Iowa, and IRFA teamed up with Iowa Corn. And we wanted to ensure that E15 was front and center. So we released an open letter to the president calling for his continued support for E15. Because it was on this very stage in January of 2016 that President Trump first announced his support for removing the regulatory roadblocks that were encumbering higher blends of ethanol. That was President Trump right here on this stage in 2016. That was the first time he said it. So we wanted to say thank you for your support. But we needed to keep it going. So now some in DC were counseling us to be cautious. Don't push too hard. But you know what? You never reap a harvest that goes unplanted. And so what did we do? Iowa Corn and IRFA took out a full-page ad in the Des Moines Register thanking President Trump for his support of E15 and noting that we needed congressional action. I was actually able to take a copy of that ad to an event with the President Trump at the Iowa Machine Shed before the big rally that was on TV. And with the help of Rick Schwark, who most of you probably know, we were able to ask President for his help. And you see him there. Now, what did the President do? We started to make our case, and he kind of cut us off, to be honest with you. And he was like, don't worry, farmers love me, I love them more. You're going to like what I say about E15 tonight, don't worry. So we're like, okay, and then he signed. You can see him there, he signed a copy of our ad. We even joked on social media that once he signed the ad, that it was a binding contract. So our efforts were rewarded more than we could have ever imagined when we set all this in motion, when the president didn't just mention E15, he leaned in. He threw his weight behind getting Congress to act. And I think we have a clip, if it works, we can hear what the president said at the rally.
I'm also working hard to expand your markets domestically, and in the campaign, I promise to support E15 all year round. I promise E15 all year round if I get elected. I was going to put out a statement a week ago. I said, hold it. I'm coming to Iowa to make a speech. I'm not going to put out a truth. I want to be there in person to tell them, the people of Iowa, to know that I am trusting Speaker Mike Johnson, who's great, and Leader John Thune, who's great. That's House and Senate. To find a deal that works, we've got it. For farmers, consumers, and refiners, including small and mid-sized refiners. In other words, to get E15 approved, and they're working on it. They're very close to getting it done. So I just wanted to let you know that. Yeah?
And the president went on to conclude those remarks on that section of his speech by saying that once Congress got that bill to his desk, he would sign it without delay. That's pretty exciting stuff. Let's hear it for the president. Now, I must also caution you, though, that that does not mean anything is guaranteed. I am not counting my E15 chickens just yet. But I do think with the president's remarks, and if those words turn into action in D.C., I think our odds of E15 success just went up many-fold. If he pushes Congress to act, I think that we can, so let me start over here. I think if President Trump takes those words, goes back to D.C., and pushes this thing through in February, I think it's actually going to be the most singular achievement for farmers that President Trump has achieved. Now, before you start throwing out other things at me, there are many other important issues. There are tax credits. There are RFS blending levels. There is trade. Those are all very important. I'm not minimizing those. My point is those are all ongoing issues. They were before Trump. They'll be after Trump. E15 represents the one shining light at the end of a very dark tunnel for farmers. And so that's why I think that if pushing it through would make President Trump the godfather of E15. And I believe farmers would be talking about that for a long, long time. So I want to end today by drawing a parallel to where I started. A generation ago, RFA, where I worked at the time, came together and with the American Petroleum Institute, and they put aside years of fighting, and they forged the great RFS compromise in the aftermath of 9/11. That went on to be passed by Congress in 2005. Now, a generation later, those leaders, maybe you remember Bob Dineen or Red Cavaney, they've gone on to other endeavors. But new leaders have taken their place. And once again, corn growers, ethanol supporters have forged a compromise with API. This time to allow year-round E15 and to provide some RFS exemption reform that the oil refiners want. It was not easy. Both sides had to bend. But here, a generation after the first big ethanol oil compromise, we have found common ground again. So I sincerely hope that Congress takes this opportunity and adopts this compromise. After 10 years of bickering, let's settle year-round E15 once and for all. But in closing, I do want to take a moment to make one thing crystal clear. If President Trump fails, for whatever reason, to compel Congress to act, the fight for E15 will continue. It is vital to the future of ethanol. It's vital to the future of farmers in rural America. So I just want to say, I think I can give a pretty good speech. But I don't confuse myself with the oratory of, say, Winston Churchill. But it's his words that are echoing in my head as I consider our next steps if Congress doesn't act. We want Congress to act, but if they don't act during February. Faced with defeat in France and the retreat of the troops during the narrow escape, quite frankly, of British troops from France during the Dunkirk evacuation, Churchill did not sue for peace. He vowed, there's a quote up here on the screen, he vowed that Britain would go on to the end. We shall fight on the seas and the oceans. We shall fight in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We will never surrender. Now, it is beyond my power, as you just saw, to give the life to those words as he did. But that is the spirit that I feel in our quest for E15. I cannot summon forth such stirring phrases to rally us forward in our decade-long quest for nationwide E15. But I can today make crystal clear that if we face defeat in Congress, we will not sue for peace. We will go on. It may be inauspicious to fight in Congress for some time, but rather, if a solution cannot be found there, then today I propose that we take our fight to the beaches of California. We will fight in the Badlands of North Dakota. We will fight in the cornfields of Kansas, and we will fight in the rolling hills of Indiana and Michigan. Yes, our fight will return to the states, where 7 Midwest governors showed us a path forward to E15 year-round. Now, it is not our preferred path forward, but it may be our only path forward for now. And if so, we will accept that challenge, because I know that you out there and our efforts with IRFA, together, when it comes to E15, we will never surrender. Thank you very much.